Yes.
It was quite loud.
You are now. Recording here. Okay. What was I gonna do for you? This button here is gonna turn on this mic here.
Okay, the right. All right.
Yes. So right now it's turned off, so you can move it around and
Yeah.
make that terrible sound.
Okay. And it seems to have some pretty good reach.
Yes.
That's what I'm picking up on.
Yep.
So, okay.
Cool.
You know that hard to read that thing and look around the microphone. You might
Yeah.
be better off visual watch.
Let's find out. All right. I'm gonna give us like a 30-second, like, get yourself ready to go here. And I'm gonna introduce myself. And I know there are some folks who are wondering or really need to use the bathroom, things like that. So all good. All right. Now, the reason I want you to get refreshed, energized, whatever you need to do is that I'm going to invite you in a very short while to actually talk with each other and use some of the skills that I'm going to be inviting you to think about. So I want you to have some energy, or whatever energy you can muster, do your best. All right. So as folks are wandering back in, grabbing what they need, my name is Allison Oliver. I use she, they pronouns. I'm at the University of Iowa in the School of Social Work, and I'm the BA program director. And I also, when people ask me if I'm micro or macro, I say yes, which has always been my social work career since I started it. And that means that my skill sets have been necessarily adapted to my client base. So my definition of a client is anyone to whom my professional attention is directed. And some of my work as a community organizer has necessitated me thinking about clients in that way. I have also worked in direct practice. I've worked in counseling. I've worked in schools. I am a community-based sexuality educator. So I've done a lot of different work. I've done case management in my county. There are a lot of different hats that I have worn in social work. And in all of them, policy advocacy has been necessary. And in all of them, relationship building has been necessary. And so I'm gonna invite you to try to add some things to the toolbox that you've already been building in policy advocacy. And in particular, I was invited to talk specifically about motivational interviewing as an approach, or the spirit of them, or some of the things that we might be able to pull from what we know about participating in change processes to apply to conversations about change. And so that's kind of what I'm going to focus on. So I'm going to weave together some of the things of little nuggets that I have taken from different kinds of work and trainings that I've been involved with across all my different hats, and try to weave them together into some toolbox possibilities. So that's what we're going to do. And just to get a sense, how many people are familiar with or well versed with what motivational interviewing is? Because there's a lot of different frameworks. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so what that means is I don't expect you to know exactly what I'm talking about yet. And this is not a motivational interviewing training because we don't have time for that today. But what we do have time is to kind of share a couple of things. One is that I want you to keep in mind that all of this is in the spirit of having opportunities to build relationships, to leave your mark in some kind of way that lingers, to recognize that a lot of times policy advocacy is long haul work, and to be able to have some options about customizing your advocacy. Because what we've heard and what's in your little handouts there is that we need to know our audience. And these give us some tools to help us know our audience and be able to customize how we engage in our conversations in ways that can be more effective. So that's what we're doing. Here we go. Okay, so here's kind of where I start. And these are also all things that Denise Rathman has available as handouts that she can send out to you. But one of the early trainings I did as a community organizer were a couple of variations on the theme of the social barometer, which is basically, and this is pulled from Katrina Shield's Empowerment Guide to Social Action. And And what this offered, and I still use it regularly, regardless of like where I'm at, is when I'm engaging in advocacy, I'm getting a sense of like, where are people at with this? And I challenge myself to not make assumptions about knowing for sure that I know where people are at, but really seeking to understand before seeking to change, or seeking to address, like really getting a sense of assessing before we intervene, which is a very social worky kind of practice. So what this barometer does is it customizes our approach based on the information that we get about where people are at related to a particular issue, a particular policy, a particular stance or decision. And advocacy, what I was taught as a community organizer, is always interpersonal. Targets are always people. They are real, live humans. So where are they? And as humans, we are all complex. We are nuanced, we are multifaceted. Where are people coming from? What is their story? And what nuances where they're at? What helped them arrive at where they're at? So some of the backdrop of like where people are at is also what is the story that got them there? And that invites what I think is one of the most effective attributes of social work practice is our curiosity in other people. So keep that in mind. Now, you've got some pens and things handy like that. There's one of those sheets that I discovered is one-sided. So I'm going to invite you at times to jot some notes down because you're going to use those for some skill practice that I'm going to invite you to do. So so it's like, oh, you got to write stuff down. You can also, like if you've got things handy that you're jotting stuff down on a phone or a device, you can use that as well. I'm just going to give you a heads up. But this is something that I invite you to come back to about where are people at. I'm going to use the same tool in just a different organization. All right, and then I'm going to kind of describe this based on where you're at and how well you can see it. So basically in community organizing, we kind of work at like what's going to shift the needle or what's going to move people more in alignment with where we have something to work with. And where people are at is going to shift how we work with them. So if people are already on board, this again, like is knowing your audience, right? If people are already on board, totally supportive of like the issue or bill that you've got, you're going to approach them from a different perspective than if they know nothing about it, which is what we call our oblivious neutrals, which I find to be a rather judgmental tone. But it just means they don't know because people can't know everything. So how we engage with people who have no previous information or very, very little is going to be different. And then there's our passive active opponents who, again, what I want to kind of point out about this is that some of the strategies that are talked about include like being soft on the person, hard on the problem. So that's still about connecting with people, building relationship, arousing doubts, which is what we can also call ambivalence. Recognizing like, where is this coming from? What needs or fears are, or hopes or goals are driving their position? And this other piece, which I think is about optimism, about giving them opportunities to change their position. Because we're human, we can do that, we're dynamic creatures. So what I really appreciate about this particular graphic is that for anybody that's basically not in the active ally place, is that there's this theme of like building a relationship, that's effective in shifting the needle. So how do we build our relationships? How do we connect with people? How do we get a sense about where they're even at on this? And that's what these strategies can try to do. So that's kind of one tool that I offer you. Another one is that if we're talking about policy advocacy in some kind of capacity, we're talking about where we're at in the stage of change. Like, and so there's different models that look at change processes. This is one of the most common ones that looks at, from Prochaska and DiClemente, about the cycle of change. How many people have seen this somewhere? The pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation. Okay, very common, popular model. Now, a lot of this is applied specifically to direct practice and how we're working with clients and assessing where clients are. But again, if my client is anyone to whom my professional attention is directed, I can look at this at any change process that might be taking place. Okay, you with me so far? Yay, okay, and you're awake. Nice. All right, so here's where we're at with it. None of these places are bad. I think that's one of the first things that I learned when I was working with clients in direct practice on change processes is about working with people really where they're at. And that, because that's the only place where we can start. And that there are reasons and backdrop and backstory about how people are where they're at. And I am trying to partner with them to figure out where do we go from here. And we do that with policy advocacy as well. Now, what that means is that our approach can be different depending on getting a sense about where people are at. So if people are at a place of like, I don't even know what this problem is, I don't really necessarily think it's a problem, or definitely not a problem and definitely not my problem, then we might put in a position of pre-contemplation, and that's going to start the conversation in a different place. Compared to like, I hear about this, but I'm really not sure if it's something that we can work on right now. That's contemplation. And the more that I was teaching our interpersonal skills lab at the University of Iowa, the more I'm listening for these change cues in every conversation I'm involved in. So a lot of the work that we're at kind of is going to be based on where we're at. If there are people who are proposing bills, then we're in that preparation action mode. And what we also know is that each of these can have some value. So if folks are in preparation action mode and we want them to think about the impact of these actions more, then we might invite strategies that give them a space to contemplate more, or give them more things to think about before we move forward, which is the same thing I do with a lot of clients about making an informed decision about the impact of their actions. And that's what we do in policy advocacy as well. So that's kind of how we connect these dots. Now, for those of you who are familiar with motivational interviewing and are like, why are we talking about motivational interviewing with policy advocacy? I do not see the connection here. I didn't originally either until I was part of a webinar from the National Healthcare for the Homeless Council in about 2015. And they started talking about this. And they were originally using it for homeless outreach and addressing populations who were unhoused. And then they realized that as they were engaging in their policy advocacy, those who were really well trained in their outreach were also finding that they were working some stages of change when they were talking with policymakers on things like housing first initiatives. So that was the first place where I heard it. And then there was this presentation from Dr. Sarah Buckingham, who's up at the University of Alaska, and she's in community psychology. But what she talked about as well is that there is a whole lot that we can do in policy advocacy that fits into these different spaces of where do we engage when someone who clearly has influence or power says, no, this isn't my issue. Where do we start that conversation that invites them to consider the possibilities why it might be their issue? And what richness is available when people are in I don't really know about this. I'm not really sure, don't know much about it, but maybe. And where can we take it? So I really looked up like what she's kind of put out there about what this can mean for how we work with all these stages of change and how it also fits with that social barometer that I talked about before. So connecting all of these dots, which brings us to motivational interviewing. And so for those of you who have never heard of it, don't expect to know a whole lot about it by the time we're done, because I'm just going to kind of pull some threads from it. But this is the definition, and this is what I really want to focus on, because this is what makes it different from like being trained in motivational interviewing or MI, between being able to kind of pull through some threads from it. And so this is a definition from Miller and Rolnick, who are co-founders, creators, collaborators of this approach. And so they talk about MI, as it's often abbreviated, as a collaborative, goal-oriented style of communication with particular attention to the language of change. And even though, as I talk about here, it was designed with individual behavior change in mind, specifically like substance use, health behaviors, they were deliberate about letting it be an evolving communication style. And they recognized that when that happened, they weren't exactly sure what it was going to evolve into. And just this last year, the network of trainers for motivational interviewing hosted a presentation on macro MI. And so we're just now seeing like this it's kind of like been bubbling for the past few years, but is really starting to take hold about how does this approach, because we're talking about change at all levels of practice and intervention. What does it look like? And what I want to focus on are a couple of things. Is that it's about the style of communication. And this is what I think is really helpful in policy advocacy, is the ways in which we can be intentional about the style of communication, the spirit with which we're approaching conversations in a way that is still goal-oriented. So this is still a purpose-driven conversation. We still have an endpoint in mind. We still have asks that we want to make. We still have stances that we want to declare. And it's with the idea about change in mind in the context of this relationship. But what can change is flexible. And that can be really important because it can help us to adjust our measures of success. Okay? So 2 things that I want to offer. One is the spirit of MI. Next is like foundational skills. The skills are what I'm going to have you jot down. So what I want you to take away from the spirit of MI, it's ultimately about being in relationship. This is a partnership. And it's a partnership that they talk about as being with and they talk about it consistently as a spirit, like this is like a mindset. This is a holistic approach that includes compassion, acceptance, partnership, and evocation. Now, a lot of these things that are mentioned in here are resonant of what exists in our code of ethics, about like our values of the importance of relationships, about people being the experts of their experience, about the role of self-determination, and ultimately people are going to decide what they're going to do, and how we can partner with that. And also working with the inherent dignity and worth, which in really contentious issues is really hard for us to ground ourselves in sometimes. That's how we can do this. And for me, this is something that when I started like utilizing it in different spaces, I could feel more grounded because I'm shifting my measure of success from getting a win to building a relationship. And so if I've planted some seeds that can shift the needle, maybe, or at least provide the opportunity where it's possible, or people can see where I'm coming from, or we can have another conversation, I'm building a relationship, I'm shifting my measure of success. So some of the things that were kind of taken away from the National Healthcare for the Homeless, National Healthcare for the Homeless Council was really about trying to bring all of these things into our advocacy places. And there are a couple of things, again, it just gives us things that we can tune in and listen for. So, and sometimes that is hard work. Sometimes it's hard to listen for where are the shared values, where is the shared agenda here? And sometimes it's hard with clients of all kinds. And we work for it. We look for it. And when we look for it, we often find it. So it also acknowledges that as complex human beings, we often don't feel 100% one way about something. We often might feel like strongly about something, and there might be some nuance to that. And this invites a space where that can happen, where we can kind of pull out what else is at play here. Where might there be places where you mostly feel this way about it, and there's some like undertones of like, but I also feel this way about it. And this is why most humans operate and what we know about change processes, even when people have really strongly held beliefs or stances, is that ambivalence about it can still exist. And they're still weighing things. And that's what this gives us an opportunity to be curious about. Okay, writing things down. So in about 4 or 5 minutes, I'm going to give you the opportunity to practice some of these skills. And it's going to be one of these. And I'm going to give you some examples as well. And they're just to try out, I'm going to ask you to try out one or two. That's the nice thing about this. You don't have to expect to be an expert on it by the time you leave the room. You're just going to try some things out. So I'm going to invite you to think about, and I'm going to talk about each of these, about how we can use open-ended questions, which actually was led with our, in the introduction today, of how can we invite people to say more. The use of affirmations, which we might look at as identifying the strengths, the effort, the capabilities, the work that we're collectively doing. Reflections, which is being able to reflect back your understanding of what they're saying, what they're getting at, where they're coming from. And then summaries. And I'm going to talk about summaries in a way of combining both what you've heard about kind of where they're coming from with where the linkage is possible with your own stories, with your own talking points, and with your own asks. So again, coming back to this term about seeking to understand before you seek to change. It's really useful to know your audience first. And you may or may not have a lot of information about the legislators you're talking with. So this is going to change how you start the conversation. You'll have, for a lot of you, you'll have your talking points, you have specific things you want to talk about. What you can weave in is, okay, that's your stance. Where is the person you're talking to coming from? And getting a sense of that first. And it's worth 30 seconds of your time if you've got 10 minutes with somebody. Of saying, I'm really interested about XYZ. What is your understanding of that? And then you kind of know, where are they at in the social barometer? Do they know anything about it? Can you pick up on their tone right away? And then lets you know, get your first impressions, where are they at? And then you can invite some other pieces that inform where you start with your talking points, where you start with your story. I'm going to share some examples about how to do that. So this evokes our active listening skills, basic social work, and how we can explore and kind of figure out where we might be coming from. And then we're listening for those places where there might be a yeah, but. This is ambivalence of yeah, I understand that some people are really upset about this, but, and then they usually offer their stance. And what we can do is pay attention to what they said first, because it's part of their thought process. And we can bring that back up. So let me start with open-ended questions. So if anything it might fit where you're going with any kind of advocacy you want to do, write it down. Open-ended questions that we can start with. If we don't really know where they're at, or if we want to get a sense of, again, where there's at in terms of stance, we can ask questions like, what is important to you about this particular issue, this particular bill? If we don't know if they have any we don't really know where they're coming from at all, we might start with so what's your understanding about HF3? And how HF3 will affect families with SNAP or Medicaid. So we can start there. And we're not only listening for content, we're also listening for mood and tone. That's helping us figure out where that social barometer is coming from. We're listening for yeah, buts. Yeah, there might be this drawback, but here's what it can do for the state. Or here's what my constituents say. And so we're listening for any of those nuances that might come up. You can also ask, what do you know about other people, people's reasons for supporting or not supporting this particular issue or bill? And again, we can use that either that kind of works with bills that they support or bills that they don't. And again, just getting a sense about where they're coming from. Now, what these questions can also do is help customize your talking points. So if there are certain talking points that they're already well versed in, you might be able to add on to that or expand on it. You might have time to share a story. If there are ones that you don't have to go there because they know it, then maybe you can spend your time elsewhere. Okay, so that's open-ended questions. 2 is affirmations. I'm going to invite everybody to try this at least once. A little goes a long way. And sprinkling in affirmations that honor people's humanity, that honor people's effort and work, no matter what. Because from a strengths-based perspective, everybody's presenting something. That can go a long way in relationship building and building rapport. So offering statements of appreciation. acknowledging efforts, like you're trying to make decisions about some really complicated issues. Acknowledges people's humanity. Or catching strengths where you can find them. So if people are asking you questions, you can say, I hear that you're committed to learning more about this. I don't know that answer right now, but I appreciate that you're wanting to learn more. And if you sprinkle that in with the, I'll get back to you, it resonates differently. All right. That's affirmations. Next one is reflections. A lot of times we just start these with sentence starters of paraphrases. And sometimes for when the people are in the passive opponents, active opponents, sometimes where I refer to this is start with something they can't disagree with, which is their own words. And it affirms understanding. It puts us in check. It kind of gives us a chance to think as well. Like, where do I take this conversation? A reflection is a really useful place to start, especially sometimes when things are feeling more heated or more contentious. It just gives you an option in your toolbox. And so we can do that. That gives us time to think, or gives the people we're with time to think. And it shows we're listening. And usually that's not a bad thing. That's the way I have to work with. All right. Summaries and information sharing. The last piece is about being able to, again, demonstrate that you're listening, not just to what your legislator knows or the policymaker, but where they're coming from, what they're prioritizing, what they feel is most important. And then this is also the place where you can bridge your story or bridge your talking points. And so you can take that where you can build on what they've said to customize your ask. And you can pull out little nuggets that they've offered. And so being able to say, like, listening to what you just said, like, reminded me about my family, actually. And then you've got an entry point into your story. You're linking. Linking builds relationships. You have a shared thread that you're pulling from. Or I appreciate you brought that specific thing up, because that is also important to me. And that's why I'm asking you to do this. And these little nuances that you can weave into the same conversations can be memorable. And they can leave people with a more nuanced or complex understanding of what the impact of this issue might be. Okay. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. And I give you about 60 seconds to kind of formulate your thoughts. But you're going to get with somebody like around your table, or if there's an odd number, like find a neighbor. So I'm going to invite you to do this. And I want you to really quickly pick an issue that you want to address, or one that you've heard today, just something you can grab real quick. And your partner is going to be somewhere on the social barometer. And I'm going to invite you to tell your partner, okay, here's where you're at in the social barometer, so they know where to start. And I invite you to choose something that's on the oblivious neutral to passive opponent to active opponent. And so it helps you work these skills a little bit differently. I think it's really helpful actually to use if you don't know where to start, go with the oblivious neutral. Because then you have a chance to start with someone who has no idea, blank slate. So, and I just want you to open up your conversation as you were planning to do so with anybody you want to talk to about things that are important to you. But I want you to try one or two of the skills that we just talked about and just try to sprinkle them in. And I just want you to do this for about 3 to 5 minutes. And if you need a couple minutes to rewind and try something again, it didn't quite land the way you hoped and you want to try it again, adjusting measure of success, then you can do that and then switch. So what this will end up meaning is that we have about 10 minutes to be able to try it out. But I want you to actually try to work the muscle a little bit and just try weaving these in. And I'm going to back it up to this one so that you've got all of them up here. But just do your best and try them out. Again, you don't have to be an expert on this, but try to have a conversation that focuses on building that relationship and understanding. And I'm going to invite my Iowa City folks to do the same. Anyone is stuck, feel free to raise your hand and I can offer a lifeline if I can. Got about 5 minutes left to practice time. Give you about 1 more minute to practice or re-practice anything. You want to rewind and repeat? I'm going to invite you to finish up your conversation, to thank your partners and neighbors if they helped you out with trying some things out today. And if there are any of those that you practiced or you heard that you're like, I can actually like hear myself using that in a conversation, I invite you to add it to like your talking points or any notes that you've got. So again, it's just adding things to your toolkit. So a couple things, like I hope this just helps to make our work more relational, because it is. As you engage in your policy advocacy today and any other day. A couple of key takeaways before we finish up is that like we can take the spirit of this being in relationship and a spirit of partnership and collaboration with us wherever we go, and it doesn't replace any of our other advocacy tactics. So I think that given the challenges that our clients and communities face, we deserve like as expansive of a toolbox as we can get, because there's a lot of work to be done. So the other thing is, again, is like being able to shift what we identify as a win, because sometimes like this work is about stamina and being able to kind of realign, reset. And when we have more measures of success, we can do that. So, and again, as has been reiterated today, really customize your approach where people are at. And if you don't know where people are at, it's okay to start there and take a moment to figure out where you're coming from first. And then that's where we go. So I really appreciate, like, this is a handout that is available. Denise Rathman has it and can send it out to folks. And so huge gratitude to folks in the work who have been doing this work that allowed me to learn from it. And if you want to continue the conversation or have other ideas or things that you want to add to it, I have like a minute to be able to answer any questions, curiosities, confusion that came up, but want to be able to address that. So any questions before I bring things back to Denise? Again, really appreciate your time. I really appreciate your bravery and trying out maybe some new things and your presence for being here today. So thank you.